Now, up next is panel discussion 2, titled Health Tech Revolution, Innovations and Future Trends. This session will be moderated by Mr. Matthew Holt, founder, author, the Healthcare Blog. Our distinguished panelists are Dr. Joel Burrell, Senior Director of Research and Engineering, Google DeepMind; Mr. Levi Shapiro, Partner, Kisner Growth Partners; Mr. Robert Garber, Managing Partner, Seven Wire Ventures; and Dr. Tomohiro Kuroda, Professor, Kyoto University. Now, Mr. Holt, over to you.
Okay, thank you very, very much. All right. Well, look, I'm thrilled to be back in Japan. First off, I want to thank Minoru Sasaki and his colleagues at MEDI and JETRO for putting on this great event. I'm Matthew Holt. I am the British guy who lives in California. So if you recognize my English accent, ignore it. Compared to the English accent on the previous panel, I know nothing about the UK. I've been living in California for about 35 years. Worth noting that I got into healthcare because I was on a project at Stanford University comparing Japanese healthcare and American healthcare. I was the guy helping the Japanese scholars find out about the American system. And then I ignored Japanese healthcare for about another 20 years after that. And then I was running the Health 2.0 conference, and I met Yo Iwami, who is the CEO of now the chairman of MedPeer, you may know as Japan's largest physician online community. And he said to me, I'd like to do a conference like Health 2.0 in Japan. So we ran that conference with MedPeer for many years, and now it's called MedTech Sum. And some of the group here, in fact, some of this group here have been at that conference every December. But I'm thrilled to be here because now it's summer and I can go and see some baseball. All right. We're going to talk about health tech revolution and see if there is going to be one. But we're going to talk a bit about innovation in the future. So who do I have here with me? Well, Robert Garber, who is the managing partner at Seven Wire Ventures. Seven Wire set up by very noted entrepreneurs in the US in digital health, Glenn Tullman and Lee Shapiro. Notably invested in Livongo, which was probably the fastest growing ever digital health company. Also now investors in Glenn's new company, Transcarent, Parsley Health, NoCD, Cylinder. You'll say a bunch more later, but a ton of consumer-facing companies that Robert's invested in. Joel Burrell, who is the Senior Director of Research and Engineering at DeepMind, obviously owned by Google. Joel has graduate degrees in math, physics, and electrical engineering. So if you want a panel where one woman is more than equal to four men, this is your panel. She's also our AI mole, and I hope that we'll find out eventually why the French invented information technology with Minitel in the 1980s. Some of you may remember that. Then they did nothing about technology for about 30 years, and now they're this hub of AI with Yann LeCun and the Facebook group there, and Mistral and Nabla and so many more, as well as DeepMind. All right, we'll find out why. Tomohiro Kuroda, who is the vice CEO of Kyoto University. He's our local expert coming down the road, but he's also spent a lot of time abroad. You were at one point was the visiting professor in Oulu University in Finland. And I assume that you have some analytics for us on the health impacts of traditional Japanese baths as opposed to Finnish saunas and which one works better to be live. And last but not least is Levi Shapiro. He is the founder of M Health Israel, which is one of the biggest communities and conferences across the world and all of new health tech. He's also a VC at Kinza Growth Partners in Israel. But he's fluent in Japanese. He lived here for many years now. I think he still lives here some of the time. Or did he live on a plane? I can't tell. But worked for Toyota for, I think, 5 years in the 90s. He also has too many LinkedIn connections to have any more. I thought I had a lot of LinkedIn connections, but he has too many. All right. Okay. So I'm going to start with, before we get onto, we're going to end with AI. You know we're going to talk about AI because it's about health tech revolutions and innovations. But before we start, I'm going to start with Tomo and ask about EMRs and data. Tomo, so in Europe, they got into EMRs relatively early in the 2000s. The US spent a lot of money getting EMRs into the hands of doctors in the 2010s and the teens. So can you tell us a bit about the state of play in Japan? And now we have all these EMRs. What's the state of play of getting data about patients between different providers and organizations?
Okay, so the Japanese government actually accepted the idea of the EMR in 1999 illegally. And then after the legal acceptance, quite a lot of big hospitals actually introduced it, hospital information system, including EMR, in 2000 to 2005. But because, well, as you know well, the Japanese healthcare system is so special. We have 242,000 providers all around Japan, and there's 1,500 insurance providers. So it's very, very complicated anyway. And then the demography tells in 2000 that half of the hospitals not introducing electronic medical record at all in this moment. But at the same time, the 95% of the bigger hospital, more than like 600 beds and so on, already implemented. So that condition is quite, how to say, separated. So there are a very wide variety of the system there. And talking about exchange, unfortunately not going so well because all the hospitals is actually too brave on their own system and also too brave on their own way of treating the patient. So there are no standard, not only the data, but also the healthcare providing process also. So the exchange is not going so well till now. So the Japanese government decided to introduce the new system a couple of years ago using this minor card and also trying to implement the national level data exchange platform from this year actually. And the e-prescription just starting this year and the e-referral will start this autumn. So everything goes on, but still the things goes on. So there are not so big, how to say, the data platform is going well in this moment in Japan.
Do you want to compare that to what you understand about the state of data platform and exchange in the US? Because I think eventually we're going to get to the question is, do we need to have real good data exchange and standardized data to make all this AI work? And that's an argument we'll get into later. But
yeah, that's a good question.
I know you've been hanging out with John Halamka, who is kind of a star CIO in America. So. Yeah,
that's a good question. So there are quite a lot of discussion about standard. But myself, I'm a computer scientist originally. So my point of view, the standardization is not needed anymore, I believe, because all the data can be processed if there are the data. So maybe
the US spent $40 billion standardizing data.
Europe also spent quite a lot, and Japan also spending quite a lot. But well, let's see how does it go.
Right. Brilliant. Okay, talking about spending money, Robert, you're from industry which has spent a lot of money. So venture capital, there was, as you know, a massive, and those who looked at the numbers, a massive boom in venture capital spending in health technology. Went from about 10 to 12 billion a year in the teens, in the late 2010s. And then during the pandemic, rocketed up at 1 year, got to, depending who's counting, 30 or 40 billion in the US spent on that. And that's now come down again. So there's massive bubbles, some really huge rounds. In Japan, Yoami has some data, which is pretty much the same shape of the chart, but the number was much lower. But it was about 2 billion, some in the order of 2 to 3 billion US dollars, or I think 250 trillion yen. I'll get my numbers right. We've had this sort of dead zone of no exits, although we just had a couple of IPOs in the US. And yet we still are seeing a ton of investment, especially in something that has the word AI somewhere in the title. So Robert, what's going on in venture capital? I mean, why in venture capital in health tech, why have we seen this continued investment given the sort of lack of exits? Where do you think the state of play is?
Yeah, first thing to say is that our industry has a horrific long-term memory, And so I've been doing this since the late 90s, and the cycle keeps repeating itself. This is the fourth time I've seen it where, the market begins to experience excess, doesn't learn from their mistakes. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So I hate to say, to be the glass half empty person, we're repeating a cycle. That said, on the glass half full side is, last I checked, we haven't solved the big problems in healthcare, right? I mean, we've been investing in digital health for the last 10, 15 years, and we still have epidemics of chronic disease, epidemics of mental health, challenges with an aging population. And so we have plenty of problems that we're still trying to solve. And I think what's lacking to date, and what I think this new wave is focused on, is moving us out of what I call digitization into transformation, right? So the first wave of digital health investing was really focused on sort of spreading some magic technology pixie dust on existing standards of care and therapeutic modalities and moving them online, right? That does unlock some access and affordability, but it didn't create the step function, I think, that we're going to need to address the imbalance we have between supply and demand, the uncontrollable costs we're seeing, the aging demographics that are going to bankrupt pretty much every country in the world. So I think we're hoping that this new wave of technology led by AI and other solutions is going to create some of that transformation that we've been lacking. I don't think that in any way, shape, or form explains the irrational valuations that have come back to the market in perhaps record time. We were talking earlier today about one business that just raised at about 5.3 billion was announced today. They have 100 million of top line revenue. So 45 times revenue feels like a hard price to justify, even.
The LA Lakers just got bought for 20 times revenue, and they're not growing that fast.
Yeah, even though I put my Silicon Valley rose-colored glasses on, I'm still squinting to see the numbers there. But so I still think there's some disconnects there, but I do think that what's driving the continued investment is, fundamental challenges that have been really well entrenched in healthcare for decades, that we haven't solved yet, and we need to solve.
So we'll get into the revolution bit, and I think I want everyone to think about is the structure of the institutions we have running healthcare, because I must admit, I thought when I ran Health 2.0 for all the years that like other industries, this technology was going to put current institutions out of business, and I was so far very wrong. All right. Let me ask you. You have to be on this panel because you're the bridge between Japan, Israel, the U.S., and other countries. So, and the Japanese market is obviously much smaller. The previous panel was talking a little bit about the U.S., and let's not forget the U.S. healthcare system at $5 trillion is bigger than the Japanese and the German GDPs, not together, but it's a huge market. Whereas the Japanese health system is only, less than 10% of 4 trillion, so much, much smaller by definition. What do you see as the appeal of coming to Japan for non-Japanese companies? Is there an appeal? Should they be coming?
Should I do this in Hebrew for all the Israeli?
Yeah,
I'm based in
all the
Israel.
Israelis are working in Singapore, if you heard the Joseph talk earlier. Anyway, I'm kidding.
Okay. So first of all, I want to preface by thanking Sasaki-san at METI and JETRO and everybody in the audience. We're honored and humbled that you've come to hear what we have to say. In terms of the attractiveness of Japan, I'm extremely biased. Let's put that out there. But I also think it's a win-win for the internationals to devote more resources and bandwidth towards Japan. And it's a win-win from the Japanese side because there are structural challenges, and technologies and new solutions can be very valuable in addressing those challenges. But nobody sent the memo to the Israeli startups or even most of the US startups. They say different language, different culture, different system, phooey, don't want to be here. But it is a very attractive market by revenue. Maybe my numbers are different than yours, but by revenue, number 3 for devices, and number 3 for pharmaceuticals. Now, there's reasons for that, structural inefficiencies. The average hospital is about 250 beds here. So of course you have to buy more equipment and spend more money for redundancy. But I think it's a very interesting moment for foreign companies to collaborate and co-develop. Who here is not from Japan? Raise your hand if you're not from Japan. Two blonde ladies, I'm guessing you're not local, but that's just me. The foreign companies haven't gotten the memo. This place is aging. This place can't afford the current structure. And there's a lot of amazing international companies that are not paying attention because all of the incentives are oriented primarily towards the United States. So I could say more, but I'm definitely excited about what foreign companies can do to energize the health system here in Japan.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple of Japanese companies coming to the US. Ubi is particularly one. So Joel, let's move to you. First off, talk a bit about the importance of healthcare within Google and then DeepMind as a whole, and then talk a bit about how the work you're doing at Google Research and at DeepMind is actually, being used currently. What are you currently doing in terms of sort of healthcare innovation? And you can say the word AI as well.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you everyone for having me today. I think at Google, we've been on the same mission for more than 25 years to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, and that's true in health, right? A lot of people, when they have symptoms, will try to, understand what's going on, and they are looking for high-quality information. And we've, over the years, we've really done quite a bit of work to provide authoritative content and information you can trust, depending on the country in which you live, where authoritative content is, of course, not the same in Japan, in the US, etc. And so that has been ongoing, I think, at Google over the years. And then there were a couple of things that we've been doing, I would say, more specifically over the last decade. If you remember, we started Verily. So Verily is Google's sister company in the life sciences in 2015. So that was a kind of a dedicated effort to really embrace healthcare more fully. And I think we explored, I think, a lot of highly innovative projects. Verily came out of Google X, which is still our moonshot factory. And Verily now has matured and is becoming more and more of an independent company. And then over the last 10 years, we've also invested heavily in healthcare research. And so we have a large team of clinicians and researchers that over the years have come to really appreciate the complexity of healthcare and what are some of the specificities you really have to take into account when you're trying to move the needle. And maybe we can divide things up in two phases. A lot of the early work we did in healthcare was in what I would call narrow AI. So narrow AI is when you're leveraging AI models to address a particular question. For example, where is a nodule on this chest X-ray? It's one question. So you have models that have been trained to do that one thing. And in one particular disease we spend quite a bit of time on is diabetic retinopathy, which is the leading cause of preventable blindness worldwide. And if patients are screened early enough, then you can really treat them and prevent blindness. And so leveraging AI for that one case wasn't trivial. Like, we really had to invent new methodologies, if you wish, to do that properly. And I think that's really how we help the field. Like, we published our research. We worked with many ophthalmologists in the early days to establish ground truth. We worked with 50 ophthalmologists, and then again published all of those results. And it's not something that a startup would be able to do, right? To do at that scale in the early days, to show what's needed to really get to scientifically valid results and clinically valid results. We also worked quite closely with the FDA at the time to show what that would mean, right? And how they should think about AI in that context. And then, of course, more recently with generative AI, we've been really pushing our models to also understand healthcare. So it means various things. It means that a model in Japan should understand Japanese guidelines and provide answers that are, again, relevant locally. But it also means from a research perspective that we've pushed some of our research to explore the art of the possible. And so we have a model called AMI, Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer, that is doing a conversation between a patient and potentially, you could think of it as a chatbot, but that would be augmenting a physician, and seeing how far that technology can go in terms of not only providing an accurate diagnosis, but also doing so in a way that is empathetic and addressing the patient in a way that makes sense for them. So a lot of work now to really figure out how healthcare is going to be disrupted by generative AI, which probably brings me to your second question.
Which I haven't got to yet. Yeah. Well, so let me say, I'm a tourist. Actually, I came here to be a tourist because I wanted to go and see your famous Hanshin Tigers. Any Hanshin Tiger fans in the crowd? No. Anyway, I'm going to go see them, but they're playing in Tokyo, so I have to go away to Tokyo to see them tomorrow, Saturday. Think of me as an AI tourist. Seems to me there are three possible worlds you can go into in AI and healthcare. There are people who say, well, you've built and you just mentioned a model you tuned, I think, is that the right term, to medical care. But you have incredible capabilities from the major LLMs, obviously OpenAI, Gemini from Google, Claude from Anthropic, the Llama from Facebook. Incredible capabilities where you can have very active conversations and they really understand. People are using them with therapists. Peter Lee from Microsoft is continually using OpenAI as a drive-by consult. So you have, maybe that's going to be enough. That's one question. The second one is, do you need to tune like some of the companies that are raising tons of money? So Robert just mentioned a bridge, which now looks like it's going from ambient scribing to sort of other areas like dealing with revenue cycle and coding of charts and what have you. You have other companies like Commure, backed by General Catalyst with lots of money to do the same sort of thing. Maybe you need a specialist a healthcare generalist. And then you have lots of companies raising money to do very specific things. I saw a company raise, I think it was $18 million the other day, just to read the chart to do compliance with care plans. I mean, speaking of tourists, am I going to one of these very small niche inns? Am I going to a massive chain of hotels? What is that's a terrible analogy. Where do you think AI is heading in terms of how the systems are understanding healthcare and are going to be able to deliver the changes we're talking about?
Yeah, first maybe to take a step back, the large language models like Gemini are indeed very capable, but none of them have been cleared for use as medical devices, right? So, and they're still not.
Can I argue with that? I don't think anyone's been cleared for use as a medical device outside of radiology, right? Although the UK has just said it wants ambient scribing to become licensed as a medical device, but everything else has to be signed off by a doctor.
Absolutely.
It kind of sneaks in under that.
Absolutely. I think right now they are not capable of augmenting doctors, right? They can be used for a lot of administrative tasks, for example, always under the supervision of a healthcare professional. With that said, I think your question is about how capable are the base models going to be, and how much adjustments or fine-tuning or other techniques do we need to make them relevant for specific use cases. And this is a question that's relevant for healthcare, but it's relevant much more broadly. What we've seen over and over again is actually that the base models are becoming incredibly capable. They do require a lot of data, a lot of compute, and architectures that can make efficient use of that compute and make sure that we're also building them in ways that have enhanced capabilities like thinking, etc. But I think the speed at which those models have gained in capabilities has exceeded everything that we anticipated. Right now, we're still leveraging fine-tuning them, right, or prompting them in particular ways. When we want to be able to anticipate what's going to happen, right? So that lets us really make them suitable and it still give them better performance for specific use cases. The other thing that I would say is, you mentioned how a lot of companies are leveraging them for particular use cases. And that's incredibly important for us, right? We provide the base capabilities and we partner with the ecosystem to bring those capabilities to healthcare professionals. It can be through large hospitals or startup like UB, as you mentioned. And I think that's really where the startups can best play, right? Like they address a particular clinical need. They don't need to reinvent the underlying technology, but there's a lot of work to do to really, to solve a clinical need and build the product and the user-facing parts of that experience.
So question for whomever wants to take this, but there are two obvious places to go here. One is, are we wasting money? Given the ability of the LLMs to scale and the ability of historically tech companies to take over the role of independent other sectors that we've seen for decades, is the same thing going to happen? Are we wasting all our money investing in healthcare-specific companies, or are we going to require a separate set of healthcare, very specific slices? What do you gents think? I see Robert going for the gun, so sorry, the microphone.
I'll bite. I think the answer is yes and yes. Yes, we are wasting money, but I don't know if I would categorize it wasting. I think at the beginning of every technology cycle, there is a certain amount of capital that's invested for learning. And I think that's a necessary part of innovation, is we don't exactly know in AI or anything else at the beginning of a cycle where the money can be best utilized. And so there's just a lot of investment going to a pretty broad horizontal approach to new technology, which is, which helps us hone down where we need to spend our time and money. And then there's sort of a second wave of much more specialized investing in innovation, which now that the use cases are more well understood, the ROI is a lot easier to address. I think what we're seeing is a lot of verticalization built on top of the base models right now. And I think we're going to continue to see that, whether it be radiology or oncology or, take your pick. And I think we're going to continue to see, based on, specific use cases and the implications both from a health and a cost perspective, vertical models that are more sophisticated, built on the backs of really deep data sets, highly attuned to a given use case. I mean, Tempus, which is a public company focused on oncology, has been a leader in terms of leveraging the technology for understanding virtual tumor boards. We're seeing advancements on the radiology side, and I think we're going to continue to see that. I think the question will be is the ROI make sense once you get down to your level, as you're talking about, at the niche, right? And so there are big categories of obvious investment. And then the question will be is law of diminishing returns as you get more granular around specific use cases. And then I think there are horizontal use cases which won't, which will be important also. We could talk about like personalization. Are we finally going to realize the promise of actually delivering medicine as an N of one, right? Instead of being a cohort-based system where everybody who has hypertension or who has type 1 diabetes tends to get somewhat similar treatment, are we going to get to this personalized medicine, and how can these models help deliver something that looks very unique at the individual level and very tailored? And does that lead to better outcomes, lower costs, better health? So I think there are definitely horizontal and vertical models. I don't think that the base models by themselves are going to be enough when we get into specialty care. It's certainly leapfrog things that more than we expected at the level of primary care, but I think we're still going to see vertical models at the specialty layer. And then we're going to see a certain amount of commoditization. I just think it's inevitable. But right now we're sort of at the flood the zone approach, right? And see what sticks, see what has impact, see where the ROI is. And right now there's a lot of investing ahead of the ROI, understandably so.
Joel has the mic, so go on.
Yeah, if I may add, I think one thing that everyone can do that is not going to be wasted or made obsolete, even with base models becoming more performant, is to think and build the proper evaluations. How do you want to evaluate those models for your particular use case? How are you going to say that for your patients, your population, the models are ready? Like in the same way that you test medical students before you let them practice, like how will you test those models before they're implemented for maybe an administrative task or something else? And those evaluations have to be, first, not available to everyone. Otherwise, the next generation of the models are going to learn them. So then it's like a student who has seen the test before taking it. It's, the model is going to perform very well, but you will not be able to tell whether or not it's actually useful for you. And then you can really test every new version or every variation of a model and decide which one do you want to leverage. And that's extremely important because given the speed at which things are moving, if you've identified your use cases, even if things don't work well enough today, you'll need to rerun those tests maybe just 6 months from now, as capabilities might have increased in a way that makes them now suitable for your use cases. So I think all of that work on actual use cases, the needs, and the evaluations, that is well spent.
So you're getting into a place that I definitely want to go to, which is how's this thing going to happen in the wild? But before we get there, I don't quite want to leave the topic of who's going to win the business battle here, and maybe Thomas, you might have some ideas, or Leve. Particularly, in America now, there is one dominant electronic medical record vendor, Epic Systems, still a privately held company. And they have this relationship with Microsoft, and they've been talking a lot about doing a lot of AI-type stuff that a lot of small companies are doing. Their relationship with Abridge, the company that just raised the $300 million. And I guess that, when we've seen in previous tech iterations, we've seen, Microsoft, there used to be, for those of you old enough from the 1980s and 90s, there used to be a lot of independent spreadsheet companies, independent word processor companies, independent presentation companies, and now there's Microsoft Office. And there used to be a bunch of companies that delivered information to consumers, and now they're buried in page 7 of the Google search results. People like Yelp and that kind of. So you can tell how large tech companies will use their position to take this over. What do you think the state of play of Epic or potentially Oracle Cerner now in terms of using this AI to move out from their installed base is versus other companies coming in and taking over a bit of what they're doing? Where do you think that play is?
Well, it's very difficult question because it's totally different from country to country. So in the case of US, as you mentioned, Epic is a winner and taking everything all. So it is too easy to make the standardization because you have only Epic there. And we have multiple companies around that, and they are competing, and they hate each other. They didn't open the database and so on. So it doesn't go well. But, this moment, as the previous two guys mentioned, that all the technology is now growing in this moment. And quite a lot of people is investing the money from both sides, from the use cases and also the platform. And talking about platform, there are quite a lot of platform, but it is easily used. It's actually open because there are no, the killer application yet for the AI or LLM in this moment. So they are waiting for the killer applications, especially in healthcare. And then there are quite a lot of small companies are trying to do their own killer applications from there and there. And then if there are 1, 2, 3 killer application providers coming, and they will take the market, I guess. And also other cases are also coming. So so we cannot expect, if I'm a banker, I cannot pay money for any company because everybody's running around. But anyway, there are quite a lot of players playing is actually the good case because there are competition, and then the full of the use cases are there, and we will know which one, or some of them are the killer or not. And then we will see that how the market is coming in, I think.
So you're saying in Japan particularly, we have a very diverse number of competitors in EMRs. If I had the killer AI application, I might actually take over the whole market. Whereas in the US, because Epic is already there, it's harder to get into to be a dominant company.
In the sense, it's a very good chance for this. Also, the Japanese players, all the international players that they are trying to do the use case is to overcome everything, to take the whole market, not only this country, but around the world, if it is a general.
Lavi, when you've been looking at this internationally, what's your sort of sense about the AI play as a whole? I mean, do you think that this is something where you're going to have opportunity to grow really big companies, or do you think the status quo and the LLMs are going to win?
About 6 years ago, I wrote a blog post that nobody read, but it was called Don't Tell Me About Your Algorithm. Nobody read it, clearly, because they're still telling me about their algorithm. So that was the height of healthcare investment euphoria. I'm coming from a market, Israel, that, like Finland or other small networked countries that already had standardized data for decades. So every company I met could license the relevant data slice over the last 20 or 30 years, and it was just table stakes. That's, in my opinion, why I wrote an article called Don't Tell Me About Your Algorithm. That's just required. I think what we've seen so far is incremental, and the theme of this panel is healthcare revolution. So stop it. Stop thinking incremental and kill the giants. Kill them all. Epic, kill them. You name it, kill them. They don't know what they're doing. How many lives were saved by Watson Health? Anyone? I'll give you a hint, it's a big round number. How many business models has Amazon introduced and quietly disappeared in healthcare? Matt, you may know the answer to that one.
9 is my guess. What is it? You tell me.
Some big number. But Mark Cuban, he's going after the market. That's real transformation. So AI is just an enabler, and stop just tinkering around with Epic. Epic is evil. They should have been broken up for a monopoly 30 years ago. At some point, the US will remember we have a Justice Department, and we will actually take action. I'm counting on the Europeans. That's the one area in the world where they excel is regulation. Way to go, Europeans. Yeah. So kill the monster. That's what AI can help to do, but it's really business model innovation and not your LLMs and not your cool algorithm.
Okay, I have two related questions, and pick whichever one you like, and anyone can pick it. So the first one is, the promise of AI is abundance, so I've heard, and we don't have enough supply in healthcare, and can we build doctors, nurses, robots, whatever we're building, to take care of all the things we haven't done, and can we use the analysis to get onto the end of one that Robert's talking about? So that would be a revolution, right? So how do we get there, and how do we make it happen? The panel's all gone very quiet.
I think one of the things you're pointing out, which is an argument I make pretty regularly, is that there's a genuine lack of bold leadership in healthcare. And that in order to change things, you got to break things, and nobody really wants to break that much glass. And the incumbency advantage in healthcare is almost like no other industry. And so those are some pretty mighty headwinds when we think about transformation, not incremental change. So, right? The financial incentives are hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me say there are two areas where I'm running why it hasn't gone more. One is international areas, developing countries where there's so little supply. Think about Africa, where there are so few doctors. Doctors that have been, like the soccer players, they've all been moved to Europe. So, where there's just a lack of supply. And you can think if you get that cheap technology in the hands. I mean, remember what M-Health used to be, Lily? When M-Health in Africa used to be, early reporting from some community health worker in Malawi. Give them AI, right? So that's one. The other, which blows my mind, is that I have these arguments every time I meet a therapist. When I say most of what a therapist does can be done by an LLM now, pretty much. And there are a bunch of people. There was a recent study from, I think, Cornell, which showed that a bot therapist outperformed real therapists. There is an inordinate supply or inordinate demand for therapy and mental health care from people across the globe, where it's massively undersupplied. Therapists get paid really badly. It's a terrible job that, you know, takes you months to get an appointment. That's something where we should be replacing that with AI and bots, and, you know, that should have been done 5 years ago, in my mind. So those are two areas. Can we not blow those two up at least?
First of all, I think to call a spade, I don't think it's fair to compare emerging markets with first world countries.
Okay.
I think the reason why we've seen digital uptake in some emerging markets is it's something versus nothing, right? You're talking about people who literally have no access to healthcare whatsoever. And so for them, it's a net positive versus in developed nations where you're replacing something with something new and innovative and perhaps scary and unfamiliar or what have you. And so I think it's a little different challenge when you're trying to say we're going to fundamentally change the way that you receive care, and those barriers to change are harder. It's the reason why after COVID, everybody went back to see their doctor in person, is because that's the familiar patient-doctor relationship, right? Now, I don't disagree with you, by the way, that for mild and moderate mental health conditions that we should be able to leverage technology to dramatically change the supply-demand imbalance, 100%. And there are plenty of other situations like that, which should be relatively low-hanging fruit, right? And that can handle a lot of mild to moderate disease, right? And then so that, you know, one of the things we've learned way back in our days in Livongo was that endocrinologists had 6 to 12-month wait lists because they were filling up their appointment books with people who were doing a really good job at controlling their blood glucose. And so they had no business going in every 6 to 12 months to say, hey, doc, I'm doing great. What they really needed to do is say, reserve those slots for the people who are really being poorly managed and needed to get the care. Really simple observation that wasn't apparent until we had a technology that demonstrated who was doing well and who wasn't. And so those are pretty low-level kinds of changes that we could make in the system, is to allocate the scarce resources to those in need and use technology for those who have much lower acuity needs. So yes, absolutely. But we have to break some glass, and we have to have some people out there who are going to sort of lead the way, and I think that goes back to leadership. And a willingness to change the status quo, which unfortunately has been in scarcer supply than I think we would hope.
I think Joel, then Thomas.
Yeah.
Thomas, then, yeah.
So sorry for that.
No, dive in.
Well, actually, I agree that doctors and nurses should be replaced in certain place, as you mentioned in the beginning. Not whole, because there are quite a lot of role, actually. And a part of maybe the most of the role they are taking in this moment in the hospital can be replaced by other person with AI or AI itself. I'm not sure, but maybe because we are concentrating too much to the hospital in this moment, or concentrating too much to the medical doctor in this moment. And as you mentioned, because of that, there are quite a long queue. And also, there are some, as you mentioned, that in Japan, there are too many machines working, and too many diseases are made by the machines, and then too many jobs actually growing every day for the medical doctors. And then it's going to be too much job there. But most of them can be done by other methods, surely. So I myself believe that the hospital won't stay like this moment. Most of the role of the hospital will be, how to say, separated or scattered around the world. Any places we can take any kind of medical care or any kind of watching out by the devices. But sometimes, of course, we need a doctor to consult or decide or make our own decision with a full of data, with a specific knowledge of the doctor. So maybe the role will change, but I believe that most of the role of the doctors will be taken out. And it may happen not only this as how to say how to say too nice, but anyway, there are countries which they have not so fully working healthcare system, but also matured country like Japan, because in Japanese cases we can see that all the doctors are aging, not only the population. Doctors are more aging than the population. So then we see that quite a lot of doctors actually coming to be a patient, not a doctor anymore. Especially in the very, very small towns. And
Sure.
then we lost all the doctor there. So we need to take the doctor's role by other method. Otherwise, all the system will collapse. So this is the moment we need to think that which role can be taken out from them.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe to piggyback on that, I think it's absolutely the case that populations are aging, healthcare professionals, I think we're lacking 10 million globally, et cetera. And I think AI as a technology is incredibly good at optimizing across many dimensions, much more so than we are capable of doing. And so the healthcare system, having the complexity it has, I think is a great example of something where AI will really help make the most of the resources we have. I actually wanted to also mention that healthcare might be disrupted in ways that we don't anticipate from a completely different angle, which is scientific discovery. We have AI now that has already revolutionized molecular biology as a field with AlphaFold, which is, has been used by 2.8 scientists worldwide. I didn't know that we had more than 2.8 biologists worldwide before, seeing some of those numbers, including more than 150,000 here in Japan. And that means, that type of research, drug discovery, but also, figuring out enzymes that can digest plastics, et cetera, that research is done at a speed that was completely impossible prior. It used to take 5 years to discover one protein, right? And now we know them all. And so if you think of it for molecular biology, and if we anticipate that generative AI will bring that type of breakthroughs in many different scientific fields, I think healthcare might actually be disrupted in a much more radical way than we anticipate.
So, which implies that we also need to disrupt or change, or maybe we get prevented by the lack of disruption of how we regulate those, because we've actually spent a lot more money on drug development per drug that gets through the process, in recent years than we did in the 80s and 90s. And you'd assume that with this increase in technology and AI, we should be able to do better. And then we have, particularly in the US, we have to fix this crazy system where we will happily pay whatever the Danes want for their for their drugs when it's clearly preventing us from using these GLP-1s and other drugs to the extent that we need to. So we have a lot of regulation and payment issues to figure out there. But what you're arguing, Joel, is that the increase in the use of new proteins and new drugs is going to really revolutionize healthcare much more quickly than we're thinking about replacing traditional doctoring with AI or even changing institutions. Yeah, I mean, that's a super interesting point. We should probably have another entire panel on that with somebody, not me, who knows something about it to moderate it. But we got about just over 10 minutes left. I really want to dive into what does the healthcare system look like. And I want to pick up on something that Robert said and ask all of you about this. So if you think about what Livongo did, or one of these, and there are many other equivalent companies, essentially taking the routine activity of a patient with diabetes or asthma or whatever the condition is, high blood pressure, and allowing them to manage themselves at home using a tool, using remote coaching, not having to just figure out what their condition was when they go to the doctor every 3 months or 6 months. And in fact, if they were quite healthy, saying they don't have to go to the doctor because we're managing them at home. We have now, and Google's in this, I just met one of your colleagues last week, Jacqueline, whose name I'm blanking on, tell me her name, do you know? You may not know. Thank you, who's the head of Google Wearables in this issue. There's a ton of activity going on now with sort of managing patients with wearables and rings and continuous blood glucose monitoring and all of that kind of stuff. We have the ability now to sort of, to if you like, manage the chronic illness of people without AI, just by measuring what's going on, looking at exceptions and figuring it. And yet we've done a really shitty job about that. We have not really figured out how to get that. I mean, I don't know, Robert, you can tell me how Glenn and his team think about how well Livongo did and how well it should have got to, but it didn't get to 35 million diabetics in the US, and I don't know how many of them are using an equivalent system, but not that many. So how do we move the stuff that we've already figured out via digital health into the mainstream? How do we do that part before we think about, blowing it up with AI?
I mean, look, one of the giant struggles that our system has, and most systems around the world have, is that they're primarily based off of sick care, not well care, and that we've created populations of fairly disempowered users and patients and consumers because we've been thought of as pincushions that things are done to. One of the things I like to draw a distinction between is engagement and empowerment. And everybody in our system keeps talking about engagement, which is really the idea of someone trying to get you to do what they want you to do. And as my partner used to say, when somebody texts you 3 times a day to remind you to check your blood glucose or your BP or something, all it does is remind you have a chronic disease, right? It doesn't actually make you want to take better care of yourself. That's very different than giving consumers information, tools, technology, and the wherewithal to actually take care of themselves and empower them with that information. The issue is that that's not how populations have been raised. And so we have some generational shift to go and some really big systemic shifts to move from sick care to well care. And in the US in particular, and I think this is the case in many other places, preventative care isn't particularly well paid for. And so we have some payment issues where we don't invest enough in well care and preventative care. And once somebody is down the path of chronic disease, changing consumer behavior in a longitudinal, durable fashion is very challenging. We can get people to do things for 2 or 3 or 6 months, but looking back years later, do we get durable behavioral change that led to reversal of chronic disease? A, it's hard to measure, and B, it's just hard to maintain. And so I think there's some pretty big systemic shifts that we have to see to get what we've already done to work better without AI. I mean, like just fundamental human behavior.
I would actually argue that AI can really help you with both making more sense of the device data, but also helping with the behavior part. So from a device perspective, we're now building large sensor models and personalized health LLMs that are really making sense of all of those data points. And if you wish, you can think of them as understanding the language of the body, right? Which is actually not trivial to understand, but they're really good at language, right? So they're really good at different types of information and making sense of it all. So that's the first step, right? Having a better abilities to integrate various signals and across different types. So your wearable data, maybe your EHR data, your imaging data, et cetera. And then on the behavior side, and I'm with you on how hard that particular challenge is, and it's been at least a decade that people have really tried to leverage digital technology for behavior changes. I think where AI can help is that it also empowers both coaches and patients to decide how they want to be coached. In the same way that in education we have LearnLM models that are there to help students, where the student can tell how they want to be quizzed, for example. And so with, in the context of behavior change, in natural language, just talking to a model, you can say that you want to be reminded 3 times a day, or you'd rather be reminded only, after a meal, or something very specific to you, to your disease, to your environment. And those agents now also have access to a lot of information about your calendar, et cetera. AI is now finally making it tractable. I think when we tried to do those things before in a very manual and ad hoc way, and then it's not robust. And if it's not robust, I think the first or second times it fails, you lose patience, right? No one wants to have those things half working. So I really believe AI here is going to change the game. So
maybe it's a question for you, Libby. You want to blow up Epic. What are the right kind of organizations that provide that kind of service? I suspect that is, Robert's talking about sick care. We do a terrible job with sick care, even with people who are already customers of these organizations. What new kinds of organizations should we have? Should this be a consumer company? Is Andreessen right? Should the biggest company in the world be a healthcare consumer company?
You're not going to find me agreeing with Looking around this audience, I don't see too many people that are morbidly obese. This is probably...
You're not looking at this end of the panel,
Yes.
clearly.
Yes, for the record, he wanted 2 sugars in the coffee that I delivered.
I wanted more, actually. You only brought me 2.
My point is user discovery, who is your user? And it's not this room, it's not this panel, it's the 43% of Americans who are obese, having a body mass index of 30 or more, who don't want to check anything and don't want to pay for anything, and they won't do it anyway without some changes in incentives. So we need to design solutions, and by we, I mean us, the technology cluster innovators, that address their problem. What's the problem in the US? 18% of GDP, and we're getting poor outcomes from that. So financial companies, that's how you fix healthcare. Supply chain companies, like Mark Cuban, that's how you fix healthcare. Coming at this from the needs of a user base that refuses to be healthy and that refuses to spend on their own health, I think you're going to have a lot of takers. When you, Matt, very eloquently suggested that the developing world is a very attractive potential market, it is. But I can tell you in Israel, somewhere between 1% and 2% of companies are addressing developing world because the incentives are focused on sick care, our pincushion obese patient living in the Midwest. So what are we doing at a transformational level, not incremental? And let's stop thinking that we're the user, when really that's not the system, that's not the need.
So on that exact point, right? If you've got a current industry, your 98% of companies in Israel who are going to look at where the money's being spent now, it's being spent by big organizations, big institutions, in hospitals. Someone was mentioning this, hospitals in Japan that need to be broken up and have their functions put out in the diversity community. I haven't seen this happen. Is there a realistic way that we can get that revolution? Because as Karl Marx said, I don't often quote Karl Marx, but I did go to Cambridge University and study Karl Marx. As Karl Marx said, and Andreessen, yeah. Well, technology eventually blows up the institute. If the technology changes enough, the institutions that deliver the current services get blown up, and we've seen it in other industries, but we haven't yet seen it in healthcare. Is there any chance of that happening? This will have to. I think. Okay, this is going to be the last question. We have a couple of minutes. So, number one, is there any chance of this happening? You can be a quick answer, yes or no. Tomo picked it up.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then, when?
Well, it's actually happening already.
Okay.
Yeah, because once the sensor is there, then all the measuring is going out of the city, and then everything can be done. So you have no need to visit every month to just check up. And if the treatment device is there, and you have never need to come to hospital, the medical doctor just need to check it from the remote. And then if the AI is there, and then the doctor is not needed anymore. So the question is whether the device can be invented or not. And then everything can go for that way.
Robert, your answer. How close are we getting to that revolution?
I think that the care delivery and consumption is going to change geometrically in the next 10 years. I've been in healthcare for 30 years, and this is the first time, despite the fact that I am a fundamental pessimist and I'm a fundamental cynic, because I've been in healthcare for 30 years. This is the first time where I think there's been a wave of innovation and potential technology that can actually seriously disrupt the way things have been done. And I like Joel's answer about, this is a potential big unlock in a way that we just have had very incremental stuff before, and this could really change the way we discover and deliver care.
Levy, what's your theory?
Bottom up. So just start, little paper cuts, slowly but surely you'll kill the giant. So just bottom up, keep cutting away. Each one of those paper cuts is going to get you closer and closer until we start to see real change.
How long till the giant falls off the beanstalk and dies?
You know what's so amazing? Again, I come from a very American-centric point of view, but things are slow, and then there's a tipping point. So for example, there are now 70 million Aura rings on human fingers around the world. That's very meaningful. It's probably a 10, 12-year-old company, and it was not happening, and now there's a tipping point.
Sure.
I would say it's really up to each country and society in so many ways to decide, because the way we are now training the next generation of doctors and the next generation of scientists, if these people actually have a dual understanding of AI and their specialty, they will build this world in which AI is really ubiquitous. And so I'm actually of the mind that the system as we know it, meaning going to a doctor, going to a pharmacy, etc., that is fairly sticky. Like I've also been in healthcare for a very long time, and people sometimes really expect massive disruption that are as visible as what we see in other industries. It may not be as visible. The front end of it, if you wish, might still be quite similar, but underneath, everything will have been completely transformed.
All right, you just heard that. A panel of optimists who believe that we are actually going to get some significant change in the healthcare system. I'm still looking for new organizations. I'm still pessimistic about the current set of organizations and the current set of regulation we have. But you heard it on this panel. 10 years, something may actually change. So please join me thanking Tomo, Robert, Levi, and Joelle. And thank you for your attention. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holt, and all the panelists for a very dynamic conversation. Thank you.